Hello Animorphs fans and welcome back to the Animorphs universe. We're doing another AniLysis today and it is on the Shrew morph. Make sure I'm pointing in the right direction. That is a Shrew, if you didn't already knew. Hey, that rhymes. It was used once, only once, and it was near the very start of the series. So it was book 2. Why was the Shrew morph used? Well, the Animorphs want to get into Chapman's house. Remember, this is early on in the series, small stuff, they're basically trying to figure out what's going on. And they know that Chapman is a controller, and possibly a high-ranking controller. So they want to get into his house. How do they do that? Well, they think, they have a cat, so let's morph the cat. Now, big problem. How do we get the cat in order to acquire it? Because it's a tomcat, probably very aggressive. We have a cat up a tree, Cassie said dolefully. You know how hard it is to get a cat down out of a tree? I have a plan, I said. Tobias, are you up there? Right above you, but I'm not going to try and snatch an angry tomcat down out of a tree. That's not what I was going to ask, I said. I took a deep breath. This night was turning weird real fast. What I need is a mouse. So that's where the Shrew comes in. Now, of course, Rachel says, mouse. Which is what Tobias then flutters away to go get. And then, why is it then a Shrew that we get rather than a mouse? Well, the book explains. Got something for you. A baby mouse. A mean baby mouse. It keeps trying to bite me. Tobias flew in a low, tight circle overhead, disappearing behind the tree branches, then reappearing. Are you ready? I held out my hands, cupped together. With amazing precision and perfect timing, he deposited the mouse in my hands. Hey, wait! Cassie pried open my hands to get a better look. That's not a mouse. That's a Shrew. See the eyes? They're too small. And the tail is wrong. That's not a baby mouse, Tobias. It's a full-grown Shrew. Sorry. Is that bad? Cassie shrugged. I don't know. I just know it isn't a mouse. And so, the Animorphs, or specifically Rachel, who wants to do this mission, has a Shrew in her hands. Let's recap what they're actually doing here with this Shrew. Marco puts it best. I'm not sure this is a good idea, Jake said doubtfully. Really? Marco was sarcastic. You're not sure if it's a good idea for Rachel to turn into a Shrew in order to lure a vicious cat down from a tree so she can morph into that cat and sneak into the assistant principal's house? What worries you about that plan? So, of course, Rachel then acquires the Shrew. Sorry, words. Difficult, I know. And then she morphs it. So let's go through, as we usually do with these morph AniLysis, let's just go through an example of, well, the only example in the Shrew's case, how the morph goes ahead. What happens during this morph? What sensations occur? What changes appear? Let's go through that now. The first sensation was of shrinking. It's a long, long trip down from being 5 feet tall to being less than an inch tall. My outer clothing fell around me like a big, collapsing circus tent. It made a slight grinding noise as my backbone collapsed into a smaller size than my little finger. There was the disturbing, not quite pain sensation that goes along with some morphs. Like you knew it should hurt, but it didn't quite. I could feel the tail sprout from my tailbone, a long, hairless tail. Not at all attractive. My legs practically disappeared, they were so small. I was a chubby little ball of fur, no more than 2 inches long, with 4 tiny feet. Then the fear kicked in, the Shrew's fear. So that's what we get for physical descriptions of this change occurring. Now this is a common Shrew. I wouldn't say its tail is hairless. In fact, it's got hair, so I don't know. But that's besides the point. That's a Shrew. That's what Rachel's turned into. You can see the tiny eyes there. The little nose, the little legs, and it's just like a ball of fur. So yeah, that's what Rachel has morphed. And now the most noticeable part of the Shrew morph. It's Rachel's first experience of something that feels very little other than panic and hunger, much like Jake did with the lizard morph in book 1. So that immediately happens to Rachel. We saw at the end of that last quote. Let's look a bit more into how manic this little morph is for Rachel. I was surrounded. Predators everywhere. I could smell them. I could see them. Huge, looming, slow-moving creatures standing above me. Rachel? You okay down there? It was Cassie. She lifted the folds of my clothing off of me. I heard the voice and sort of understood it, but it was more like distant thunder. It didn't really mean anything, at least not to the shrew. It was looking for a way out. Its brain might have been terrified, but was also amazingly smart. It was evaluating every possible escape route. It was measuring the distance between the 3 sets of legs. One set of legs moved slightly. I was off like a shot. Rachel, you have to get control. I knew they were right. I even sort of understood what they meant, but the terror was so strong, the urge to survive was so powerful. And at the same time there were other feelings. Hunger. I smelled nuts. I smelled dead flesh. I even smelled the maggots squirming on the dead flesh. And I wanted them. I know it's too gross, but I wanted to eat those maggots. So Rachel's going a bit mad in this shrew morph. She's going around, everything's scary, everything's scary. She knows that people are speaking to her, but the shrew terror is overwhelming her to an extreme degree. And then it's up to Tobias to come and save the day. He scoops her up, carries her, so that she can't run away anymore, and basically forces her to remember things that recall her human life, like so. I looked down, and with my dim shrew eyesight, saw the shadows shooting past down below. I have you, Rachel. Try to be calm. Think about something human. Think about school. Remember school? School. Yes, I remembered school. Quite suddenly, the shrew mind lost the battle for control. It was like a switch had been flipped. I was in charge. I knew what I was. I knew who I was. I'm okay, Tobias, I said. You can set me down. Rachel then, of course, is clear-headed again, and so they crack on with the mission. And crack on with it they do successfully. So Rachel is put by the base of this tree where Fluff and McKitty is hanging above, and then, yeah, mission successful, as we shall see now. I was so preoccupied thinking about the shrew's hunger that I missed what happened next. I didn't even notice until I heard the sound of scraping tree bark just an inch above my head. Fluff was dropping through the air right on top of me. I froze. Jake and Marco did not freeze. Marco grabbed Fluffer in mid-pounce. Fluffer rewarded him with a nasty slash of his claws. Marco yelled and almost dropped the cat. Jake grabbed Fluffer by the nape of the neck, and Cassie ran up with the animal carrier. The 3 of them managed to stuff the squalling, hissing, slashing Fluffer into the carrier and closed the door. I was already morphing out of the shrew body as fast as I could. And that's the last time we ever see the shrew morph in action. But it is brought up again a few times during the series. And once again in this book, as some of you might recall, Rachel has a rather disturbing dream. Maggots, squirming, crawling, busy little white maggots. They were all over a piece of rotting meat and fur. In my dream, it was a dead cat. A dead cat covered with vermin, eating the decayed flesh. A shrew was getting in on the feast, eating the dead flesh and the living maggots with equal enjoyment. In my dream, I knew I was that shrew. And we know that this dream probably isn't a one-off for Rachel, it's a recurring dream. Because we'll look at a quote now where we're reminded of this dream, and it happens a couple more times, mostly in the early books. I think the last time actually it was mentioned that she remembered this shrew morph in particular was book 6. But we do get this quote from book 3, the next book, saying that Rachel still has these nightmares. She still had nightmares about the shrew experience, its fear and, worse, its hunger for bugs and rotting flesh. And the shrew morph is an odd one in that we experience a lot of animals that have this desperate need for sustenance, for food, this utter terror, this raging need going on. But in book 53, The Answer, the shrew is the creature they use as an example of one that's very similar to the taxon hunger. Here's the quote. They have a ring of red jelly eyes and a lamprey mouth, and they are hungry as shrews. Always hungry. Always. It's a madness, a raging, insatiable need. It must have been Rachel that described this insatiable need, this hunger that cannot be quenched. And I do think it is notable, more so than many others, hey Lila, that this shrew is put aside as being incredibly hungry and that's all it cares about. And that's why Rachel has these nightmares of her being the shrew and just, no matter what's in front of her, it's decaying flesh and maggots. she wants to eat that. And I think there is a deeper meaning behind it. But before that, let's get one more little quote out the way. And it's just regarding this particular shrew that Rachel morphed. We don't really get many details, of course, but we do get this bit here. She was not a happy shrew. That's referring to the shrew specifically that Rachel morphed in book 2. She is not a happy shrew. So, and this was after Rachel, certainly after Rachel acquired. Can't remember if it was after morphing. Either way, Rachel immediately thinks that this shrew is female, which could be, but maybe then again it's just Rachel projecting her femininity onto the shrew. So anybody does it, you know. If you think of anything that you don't know its sex, then you say he or she, often or usually depending on your sex. That's just a thing. I'm just throwing that in there because it might be the case that Rachel actually knows that this is a female shrew that she's morphing. Okay? What do you reckon, Lila? Should we move on to the deeper, meaningful stuff? Yes? Okay. Though this morph was only used once, I do think it was used purposefully. It's near the start of the series and its task is minimal. It's the basic purpose of this shrew being involved in the series is in order to attract another morph for them to acquire to actually do the mission. So its purpose is very minimal, but it has a lasting effect on Rachel. And I do like to compare it to the lizard from book 1 that Jake morphed. Similar fear, need for hunger. For that reason, I think the shrew is less impactful. As you're actually reading it, it's got less of an impact than Jake's lizard morph did because it's very similar. But I do think there are distinct differences. For one thing, Jake's incident that he had with the spider with the lizard was eating a spider. Something that he didn't want to do, but he did it anyway. And he was feeling the spider inside of him long after that had happened. I mean, we'll get to it when I get to the lizard analysis. But I do think that's a foreshadowing of Jake down the line. He's got all this fear going on and he has this hunger and he does this thing that he doesn't want to do, that he's thinking to himself, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, but this, he needs to do it, he does the deed, and then he's still feeling it long afterwards. It's a metaphor for Jake doing things like destroying the 17,000 Yeerks, something that, you know, we know that he probably didn't want to do, but there was a need to do it. And he did it, but it's a decision that he would remember, like that spider in his stomach. He remembers that spider was still moving in there. He was still feeling it. I think it's very similar with Rachel here. She had this dream where she's eating this decaying flesh and also these little white maggots, and she's indiscriminate on what she's eating. So long as she's eating something. The dead cat, you know, she morphs a cat in this, so maybe it's her feminine side, her gentle or graceful side that's died. And then you've also got the maggots, which are like the enemies, the bad guys. The Yeerk's a metaphor for that. But she, in this new world, as this frightened, shrew-like creature, just gobbles it all up. Just doesn't care, go for the good stuff, go for the bad stuff, I'm going to eat it up. And that actually, that metaphor works with Rachel, because what is Rachel's character? She, spoiler alert by the way for the end of the series, if you don't want to hear spoilers, spoiler alert incoming in 3, 2, 1, Rachel dies at the end of the series. But the way the series is written, certainly towards the latter part of the series, is that she was too far gone to live a normal life after the war. She couldn't have. Book 48 is all about Rachel realising that if the war were to end, she would still need that adrenaline rush, that need. She would still need it. And so if the bad guys are gone, if the maggots are gone, then she would just as happily eat on the dying flesh of this cat. Which could be a metaphor for good people, good things. So, is it foreshadowing for the Rachel storyline? Quite possibly. She carries on with this nightmare, indiscriminate feeding. I mean, I always end up having to bring it up, and someday I will do a re-evaluation of book 37, because I actually do start to think maybe there's more to this book that I didn't see before, why it is the way it is. But Rachel in that book, without Jake as a leader, was unrestrained, and she was a bully, like a mega bully, and she didn't really care who she harmed so long as she achieved her goal. That's what the shrew is doing in this dream. Doesn't matter what the shrew is eating, it just needs to feed. It needs to have this adrenaline rush. And that matches up with the Rachel we see in book 37 and around that as well, the whole Drode stuff. So I do think the shrew morph, although it was used very minimally and only once, I do think its influence, its meaning is important for Rachel's character. And this was right at the start. I'm not sure how much the authors had it planned. I mean, again, you've got Jake with the lizard, Rachel now with the shrew, and I do think there's a metaphorical side to it. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into it. I mean, I do that. I like to figure these things out. I like to say puzzle piece. What happens if we put those together? Does that make a picture? And sometimes it makes pictures that look convincing but weren't there initially to begin with. But that's all right. It's called death of the author. You know, once an author's written something, it's no longer their creation. It's what you make of it in your head. That's the whole death of the author thing. So I see it as a metaphor. The shrew morph is a foreshadowing of Rachel as a person, the need to seek sustenance indiscriminately. And at the moment she's concentrated on these maggots, but as soon as those maggots are gone, she's got to find something else to feed on. And that could be something that's not quite an enemy. And that's why Rachel knew, I mean, obviously this is a point of contention amongst AniLysis fans. Rachel thought that she knew she had to take on this suicide mission because she knew that she couldn't survive after the war. She wouldn't be able to do it. She'd become the bad guy. She'd become this violence-hungry creature, like she did in book 48. And it all starts from this, the shrew morph. So how do I rate this morph overall? I think, you know, if it weren't for the fact that there was a meaningful side to it, Rachel's dreams and all the foreshadowing of that, it'd be a pretty wouldn't be very memorable. Just a proxy morph, basically. It's not as good as the lizard one, because that was more impactful. It's basically, the shrew morph is the same thing happening, basically. It's alright, yeah. I think with all that metaphorical stuff thrown in there, I like it. I think it's a good morph, a good addition to the series. Do you agree with me? Because I know there are some morphs that the Animorphs use throughout the series that are a bit more, you know, don't really need that one. Or what have you. But yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. So thank you very much for watching. The next AniLysis is going to be on the Pangabands. Do you remember what those are? Well, we're going to find out in the next episode of AniLysis, and you and I will become experts in the Pangabands, okay? So look forward to that. That will be coming up soon. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next time. Ta-ra! Oh, from the Animorphs universe. Yeah, that'll do.